Welcome back to the Mat Return. I'm Andrew Deal.
I'm AJ Piazza.
And I'm Evan Smith.
And today we will be recapping the NCAA championships where Penn State took home the championship once again, and we'll be going over some recent commits that the Penn State Nittany Lions got. So, AJ, what really stood out to you about Luke Lilledaal's performance in the NCAA championships?
Yeah, obviously, at the press conference before, he was very confident and came off as almost a little cocky. And, he was backing that in the early parts of the NCAA championships. But once he faced Sheldon Seymour, who that match was close earlier in the year as well, but Seymour actually got the edge of him in this one. And I think part of the issue for him in the later parts was the experience. Sheldon Seymour's a bit older than Liljedahl, and I think that showed to play as it went on and as he went deeper in the rounds, that the experience really got the best of him there.
Yeah, that Seymour match was kind of controversial in the fact that Seymour did a lot of stalling. I will preface that by saying it seems like every later round match that wasn't a blowout kind of ended with whoever's in the lead stalling, and then with you're the fan of whatever team is the victim of that. You're mad about it, and then when it's your team, you don't really care. I think Carter Strauchy got away with that in that last match as well. Yeah. So I'm not gonna get too mad at that, but kind of a bad loss. We were making jokes before that round, so I guess we kind of jinxed it. But Liljedahl did do a good job coming back in order to get third place. And got a pin on his way there in the consolation bracket. So at least he was able to brush that loss off and kind of get motivated, get angry from it.
Yeah, it was good to see that he was able to back up that Big Ten win over Ramos by pinning Ramos, who was by far the number one wrestler in the weight class throughout the year, and being able to fight back and get third. We saw that a trend for a lot of the Penn State wrestlers throughout. Is they fell in the semis and then were able to bounce back and show that they weren't just going to give up. So a big win over Ventresca from Virginia Tech to get into the third place match, and then pinning Ramos was massive.
He basically ran like what we predicted his championship bracket would have been.
Yeah.
Which, I will say, certified ball knower. I've been calling Vincent Robinson all year. I just need my credit on that one.
I think 125 seems like every year it's just the most wide open, like the most craziest things could happen in this weight class. Moving up to 133, Braden Davis, the 8th seed, finished in 5th place. What stood out about his performance?
Yeah, for me, speaking of, ball knower, I guess, just want to say, earlier in the year I picked Lucas Bird and he ended up winning. But where I'm going with that is Davis did lose to Lucas Bird again, who he lost to earlier in the year. And I will say, for Davis's performance, I think you should look at it as a positive. He came in as the 8th seed and finished in 5th place. That's ahead of, his spot that he came in. And he looked really good when he got in the consolation rounds, ending with a pin, I believe. And, Lucas Bird is the best wrestler at 133, and that's a very tough task for a guy like Davis to face. So I'd say overall, even though he was the biggest wild card, that he was maybe even the biggest positive in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, it was a rough draw for him. The issue for me is that how badly Bird dominated him in that match. It wasn't like it was a close loss. It was 9-0, and Davis couldn't get anything going. And then, did he get pinned in consolation, if I remember? No, he got
he got the pin.
Yeah, he got the pin in 5th place for the 5th place match.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I'm not too high on it. Granted, Lucas Bird kind of needed to win because his girlfriend's 6'3", so you kind of have to be a national champion for that to work. Continue that conversation how you'd like.
I don't really know how I follow that up, but once again, just being able to bounce back after the loss. I don't want to say we kind of expected him to lose to Lucas Bird, but Lucas Bird was the number one ranked wrestler and ended up winning. And Davis just looked outmatched in that bout. Really didn't show much offense, and then kind of continuing that trend from the season. Like if he was facing a higher ranked guy, you didn't see as much offense from him. But if he was facing a guy right around his ranking or a bit below, you saw him be a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah, and just to kind of bounce off of that point, like it seems like Davis, when he'd be the higher seed or maybe not know that he was better, but ranked higher, you'd see him be more aggressive. And against a guy like Lucas Bird, he was very conservative, and maybe that's just Bird's style, but he really wasn't trying to get a ton of takedowns. And I think that's where some of those inconsistencies really, spiraled from, is him just being a different wrestler against opponents that were ranked better than him.
Yeah, it almost seemed like when his opponent came out first, he didn't really know how to respond to that. Because when I thought about him getting pinned, that was in the consolation of the Big Ten tournament, where Nick Berzakis kind of came out like lightning compared to him, got him on his back, and ended up with that shock pin. That didn't happen in this tournament, but if we watched it, we looked down, Lucas Bird had a 3-0 lead before our eyes could process from what was going on from the top row of the stadium. It's kind of like one of those deals where the second you get that first takedown, you can kind of tell that match was going to be over for Braden Davis.
Yeah, and just being able to bounce back, he beat two guys and then ended up losing to Zan Fugit of Wisconsin to get to the 5th place match against McGonigal from Virginia Tech, another Virginia Tech guy. And he also got the fall, like Lildahl, in their placement match. And I think overall a good tournament from Braden Davis, 5th place above his ranking. So we'll see where he fits into the lineup next year, if he fits into the lineup, depending on what all happens. And
yeah, we'll get into that a little later.
Yeah, we'll move up to 141. Bo Bartlett, the number 2 seed.
I'll start with this one. Bartlett, it looked good against Mendez, in the regular season and in the Big Tens, and then I guess when it really mattered most, he just wasn't able to get it done. And part of that is, I think, his aggressiveness as well. He's more of a defensive first wrestler, in my opinion, and that really shows in these matches against Mendez. And again, even guys ranked higher than him, even though he was number 1 at one point. But when you have those top 3 guys, even including Hardy from Nebraska, he really doesn't. He's very conservative with his, attempted takedowns, and that really showed against Mendez. And Mendez just was way more aggressive than Bartlett, and obviously Bartlett ended in 3rd, which isn't bad. But he's been speaking about it from the beginning of the year of how he wants that national championship, in his final year of eligibility, but just wasn't able to get it done. And I think part of that was just Mendez's aggressiveness.
We talked early in the year how for half of the year, Bo Bartlett just looked off, like slower, and came back at the end of the season. That old Bartlett was kind of what he was doing throughout that championship round. Even that match with Mendez, it was pretty slow. Ended up being the sudden victory in the wrestlebacks was probably one of the most entertaining ways to end that feud, or at least at the collegiate level. And then Mendez obviously got him in kind of surprising fashion. I thought he escaped at one point.
Yeah,
You could argue there was the locked hands there a little bit from Mendez, not as much as some guy that we'll talk about later. But then Bartlett goes in the consolations and goes right back into that Bartlett we saw at the end of the regular season, going crazy, getting a pin.
No, he didn't get a pin.
He didn't get a pin.
Yeah, I was looking at Codorant?
Codorant,
yeah.
Or Codorant?
Got those two results mixed up there. But either way, coming out hot, scoring 11 points in each match. Like, where was that during the championship round? It could have been the mustache, I guess.
Yeah, he did. He did
Yeah.
shave the mustache after his loss to Mendez, and went undefeated after that. So maybe that was it.
Well, and looking at his scores from the overall championship rounds, I mean, he beat Jordan Titus from WVU, who was the 31 seed. He only beat him 4-2, and then his next match only won 4-1, and after that only won 5-0. So very low scoring from Bartlett, which we've seen throughout the season, and then another Bartlett Mendez classic where it did go to sudden victory, and even further on from that, and another low scoring match between those two, as we've seen throughout their long history. But like you said, Evan, he just kind of bounced back, and it became a trend with these Penn State wrestlers. They lose in the championship round and then are able to turn it back on and get back to a higher point on the podium.
Speaking of which.
Yeah,
we'll go right into Shane Van Ness, the 3 seed.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, the number 3 seed. He also finished in third.
Yeah.
So far that's 3 for 3.
Yeah. I was one to say that his match against Ridge Lovett earlier this season was a fluke. I was wrong. I'm sorry, Ridge Lovett. And Ridge Lovett just kind of has Van Ness's number, it seems. Like he was just, I don't even know the correct terms, just all over Van Ness in that match and really didn't even give him really a chance to do anything. And obviously, Lovett ended up being the national champion. But when you looked at Van Ness in the consolations and up until his match to get third place, he was really dominant. He pinned someone and he was all over the mat in those rounds. And you were almost wondering where that was against Lovett. But I think it's just one of those where Lovett has his number. And, he really showed that in the semifinal match.
Yeah, okay. I asked Lovett, how have you been able to score more points on Shane Van Ness than dang near all of his opponents combined? Not speaking literally there.
Yeah.
Don't fact check me, comment section. But he basically said that a lot of wrestlers that he faces will kind of play that more defensive style approach, while Shane Van Ness is willing to go at you. He'll start the attacks, and Lovett just said he was able to counter that with his skill. And I think some proof of that would be in that championship match. Lovett only won it 1-0 because Caleb Henson, star of the class, didn't have that aggressiveness. So it's one of those things that a lot of times pays off for Van Ness, but a guy like Lovett who kind of physically outmatches him, if you look at the two, it's going to be hard in order to get those early takedowns to get that lead.
Yeah, and in a blink of an eye, he was down, I believe it was 10-0.
Yeah.
Or 11-0. It was something like that.
It looked like he was going to be tech fault.
Yeah. And then I actually am impressed with how Van Ness kind of battled back.
Yeah.
He was down 10-0 and only lost by 6. So even though it was a loss, he still was able to battle back, and I think that might have given him a little bit momentum going into the consolations where he pinned his first matchup and then won by a major decision by 11 against Dylan D'Amelio of Ohio State. So another impressive response from a Penn State wrestler at 149 pounds. And good news for Van Ness, Reg Lovett is a senior, so you won't have to worry about him next year. Now we move to 157 pounds. Tyler Kasak, the number 1 seed, and he kind of, I don't even know how, I'll let you guys try to describe this first.
Is it wrong of me to say that he might have been the most disappointing of the bunch?
I mean, the most disappointing thing about this whole tournament is not hearing Ain't No Grave blast through the finals. That would have been the most aura.
It's not even that. I just think the expectations for him, especially after he broke Ja'Cory Teemer. I mean, he didn't even make it to. He lost his first. Yeah, he lost his first 2 matches. But Tyler Kasak had such high expectations that I think they were almost a little too unrealistic. And going against a guy like Joey Blaze, who we all said was really underseeded and even could have been seeded really higher, that's a tough match to really have. And Blaze obviously got the best of him and ended up going to the national championship, but Kasak was a different wrestler after he lost that match. And when you were watching him in the 5th place and 3rd place match, he at certain points it looked like he was only going for the pin, and nothing else. And he just looked like a different, wrestler out there. And I think this is something that, while the results might not be there for this year's NCAA championships, watch out for him next year because he might be a completely different wrestler next season.
Yeah, because he got the pin against Myers Shapiro, which he was very unhappy about, if you haven't checked social media recently.
Yeah.
Well, we'll leave it at that for now. But then I think it was the match against Chumley. We were calling it because it was only 4-2, but it was just Kasak trying to roll him over rather than going for the scoring. Sorry, it wasn't only 4-2. He didn't. Oh, I just read that bracket completely wrong. But Shapiro was the match where he looked like he was just going for the pin the entire time. He got the fall before that against Fish.
Yes.
Case in point, stands. Shapiro was very unhappy. That match against Chumley, though, was the same thing where he ended up with the 8-0 victory, but he could have tech-falled him if he just kind of wrestled the Penn State way, not chasing the pinfall like it looked like he was doing the whole time.
Well, that also happened against Swisher in his first consolation match. He only won 5-4. He got the takedown pretty quick, and
Just in the opening seconds.
yeah, and then immediately had him on his back for like seconds. I don't even think he got near fall points.
Yeah.
And then he continued to try to turn him over whenever he was on top. And then Swisher almost beat him. Like, I think he was trying to be a little too aggressive, and it almost came back to bite him, but he ended up getting the win and continued that strong performance throughout the rest of the consolations.
Yep.
Now to the first champion for Penn State, one of only two, which only is a little bit weird to say, I guess you could say. Some people would be happy with two champions. Penn State fans, not so much. Mitchell Messenbrink, 165 pounds. Kind of expected.
Messenbrink wins, lol.
Yeah, honestly,
Yeah.
I don't really have anything to say about this one other than in the championship match, it kind of just looked like he was almost playing with Caliendo at certain points, as if he knew he was the better wrestler. And, for Caliendo, we heard that he was not a happy guy after losing to Messenbrink, which, understandably, I mean, how many times, especially for him, has he lost to him? I want to say 5.
It's 6 now.
6 now? So 6 times.
Messenbrink's 6-0 against Caliendo.
Yeah, see, that's just going to, that's really frustrating to just constantly lose to the same guy. But Messenbrink is up for the Hodge
Yes.
for a reason. And how many tech falls did he have this year? It's just almost every match was basically a tech fall. But, it didn't expect anything different from this weight class.
It kind of expected what we thought we'd get out of the Messenbrink run. A couple of tech falls, a couple of big wins, and then beating Mikey Caliendo. It's kind of hard to analyze because it's what we thought would happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, part of me doesn't like the narrative that Caliendo closed the gap even more from the Big Tens because Messenbrink won by more. Like, obviously sometimes you don't want to look at the score, but Messenbrink was in full control this time where Caliendo was in striking distance in the Big Tens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
And good.
it's interesting. A lot of like the national media that were sitting in the meeting room with me had that, they were saying Caliendo closed the gap, and I wasn't able to pay as much of attention to the match as I would have wanted to because of the press conferences going on. So I kind of agreed with them. And then I went back and watched it. I'm like, okay, maybe if you don't know Mitchell Messenbrink, you might think that.
Yeah.
But then when you're just watching him jab around like he does, you can tell he was enjoying himself out there.
Yes.
Well, at one point, lost his mouth guard. Literally just reached down, picked it up, put it back in.
Yeah.
Like, he just has an insane amount of confidence in his wrestling.
It even stretches as far as Big Tens. He was talking about all highly of Mikey Caliendo and his performance. And then Nationals, he just ducked the questions, essentially. Like, he wasn't going to talk trash, but you could tell he didn't want to say anything positive after that one.
Yeah.
So, kind of expected from Messenbrink. Actually, not kind of expected. It was expected.
It was expected.
He was by far the best wrestler in this weight class, and it's still kind of proven that Caliendo significantly above everybody else, Messenbrink significantly above Caliendo as we enter next season as well. 174, Levi Haynes, first year at 174 pounds, and didn't quite get it done as the number 2 seed, but he did come back and win third. What'd you like from Haynes' performance?
Yeah, I won't say that this was really an upset. I think Dean Hamity is someone that was underrated and overlooked in this weight class, and obviously he showed why he deserved to be a national champion in the national championship, obviously. And for Haynes, this was the first time, I guess I'd say, that he wasn't in complete control of the match. I thought Hamity out-wrestled him. Now, obviously, Haynes came in third and, dominated in the consolations. But overall, I thought this is a good start for Haynes at 74. And the reason for that is O'Toole and Hamity are both
They're both gone.
They both no longer have eligibility. And I think for next season, this is Haynes' weight class to really run with.
Yeah, one thing I do want to shout out with Levi Haynes is that he had his first round opponent changed about a day before the tournament started, and he ended up pinfalling Branson John. Not much of an accomplishment. I believe he faced John before.
Yeah.
And also still remember them at the Big Tens referring to him as John Branson for the entire weekend and nobody ever correcting them for it. But one of the things with Hamity is that, David Taylor, Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
Haynes was one of the guys who was probably closest with Taylor in the room. You got to think, and Hamity denied it, but of course he's going to.
Yep.
Taylor had to have some sort of like advanced scouting on Haynes compared to any other opponent that he would have faced that year. Hamity said it was more of just preparing himself, which you can buy after he defeated Keegan O'Toole. I just think at some point, David Taylor had some secrets in there to give to Dean Hamity.
Yeah, and it just seemed overall throughout the national championships as we were there, David Taylor and really Oklahoma State weren't really answering any questions related to Penn State, or were being very not going really into detail about it. And I wonder if that was obviously planned or not. But because before the matches even started, David Taylor was asked about Cal and how dominant really Penn State has been, and he didn't really talk about it as much as you would have thought he would. So it was just interesting to see how these Oklahoma State wrestlers and Taylor himself were answering like those kind of questions.
It was extremely funny, that press conference, when
The
somebody asked.
ice cream machine.
Oh, yeah, that. But
Well,
then
yeah, that too.
somebody asked all three of the coaches there, what does it take to catch up to a Penn State dynasty? And it wasn't Virginia Tech, he wasn't there. It was Penn and Rutgers coach just looked down at David Taylor, and he gives him a look back like,
Yeah, he didn't even try to answer. Also, David Taylor was very frustrated at the ice cream machine.
As were all of us.
Yeah, honestly, that was really annoying.
I'm glad that he spoke for us there.
Yeah, true. But it was just a little surprising because I would have expected him to say something about it in detail, but he really didn't go into it. And I'm just thinking that was probably planned.
Yeah, it seems like throughout the season, like you said, hasn't really been answering too many questions about Penn State, and I was able to find the transcript from that. And the question was, what is it going to take this weekend or in the future to unseat Penn State from where it is in college wrestling? He answered last, and he said, I think we laid out a plan when I got to Oklahoma State of what we were going to do to be successful, and I think you've got to surround your guys with the best talent in the world, developing world-level RTC, which we've done in a short period of time. That has nothing directly related to Penn State. Penn State has done all of that, but it's not connected to Penn State at all. Didn't necessarily answer the question fully.
You can understand why he doesn't want that narrative to continue on.
Yeah.
But he should also understand why it's out there, because if you look at that RTC, some of their big signings, the only one that I can think of specifically right now, Roman Bravo Young, following him along from Penn State. So it's going to be an aspect there of the coaching, the Cal Sanderson coaching tree is always going to follow, because he's the first big name to become a coach, and did pretty well. He led Oklahoma State to have the same amount of national champions as Penn State had this year. So
You can definitely see what David Taylor is building there at Oklahoma State, and he's starting to recruit really well as well. So definitely be interesting to see how much they close the gap, if they close the gap in the upcoming years. But back to Levi Haynes, was in his third place match, was able to defeat Patrick Kennedy of Iowa 11-3. Really wasn't in question at all in that match of whether he was going to win. Now to 184 pounds, the second champion for Penn State. Making history, Carter Strachey wins his fifth national title, and he was the 1 seed. He faced the guys we were expecting him to face, and he still came out on top.
yeah,
You got it. You can start.
honestly, 184 was the most chalk bracket that we had at this tournament. And it's not really surprising, because if you look at all the narratives, it was Strachey's ahead of the pack. Parker Kakaison's, if you want to be nice, call him the 1B. Max McAnally is upcoming force, and Dustin Plott only loses to those three names.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. The only sort of surprise here that I saw was that Strachey beat Dustin Plott as badly as he did, because if you look at Plott's career, up until a few months ago, he had only ever lost to Parker Kakaisen, and then he lost to Max McAnally one time. So I thought Plott wouldn't beat Carter Strachey, but he would hang in there with him, but it was not even close.
Yeah, and for Strachey, I mean, first ever 5-time national champion. It was interesting, one, how that whole day worked, because he was the first match of the night, which I don't think he was too happy about. People were a little confused.
You think?
Might have been to
He's
do
still
with
talking about it.
ratings. I don't know. We won't get into too much into that, but it was just interesting how he really downplayed that, and he was asked about it, and he referred to Cale, his coach Cale Sanderson, as the best wrestler of all time. So it's just interesting to see how a guy like that, to win 5 national championships, downplays that accomplishment. But overall, I think just that he did exactly what was expected of him, and Kyson was close, but it's just tough when Carter Strachey's on the other side and can't really do much against him, because it was obvious that, one, he was ready for any opponent he was going to face, and two, he wanted that just more than Kyson did.
I mean, he's got everybody scouted 157 to heavyweight. So.
He does.
Yeah, I'll say it surprised me, but it also didn't, because Carter Strachey seems like the ultimate student of the game, that he really knows and scouts all these guys, and obviously can provide helpful little things to his other teammates. And it wouldn't surprise me if, by this time next year, where Carter Strachey is on the coaching staff or something like that.
I was gonna say that the way he was talking after he won, it sort of sounds like he wants to supplant Cale Sanderson if that time comes anytime soon. He was saying how the exact word he used is that there's some record coming up that he didn't remember exactly, that he thinks Cale might be ready to retire after breaking it, and he didn't say I'll be there waiting, but in the long form kind of wrestler talk way, that's kind of what I got out of it. So it'd be interesting to see if the Carter Strachey being the head coach after Cale Sanderson, those seem like two opposite personalities.
Yeah, but just to get into what Andrew said before, sorry. You saw Strachey out there during Messenbrink's national championship match and Josh Barr, and he was almost coaching them from the sideline. He was getting really close to the mat. I mean, he was really into all their matches, and I remember just someone walking by. I don't even think they were really saying it. Was just I'm a little surprised that him and Messenbrink are so close. I'm like, why? They're teammates. What do people expect? But for the Cale thing, I wouldn't be surprised if Strachey had not an official role as an assistant coach, but if we see him around or next year, and if he's around the team even.
Well, he'll definitely still be a part of the NLWC.
Exactly, and
so.
I feel like he might be in the Jason Nolf position, where I don't think Nolf is official coach, but he's probably NLWC wise the most common guy that you see there.
Yeah, because
Nichols kind of the same way, albeit celebrity status along with the UFC. He's there a lot.
Yeah, just because obviously Cale's not even 50 yet, and I don't see him really retiring anytime soon. But I could see where Strachey might have a little bit of a gig maybe as an assistant coach, and then could develop into maybe even a head coach in the future.
I could even see Nick Lee seems like the kind of guy that would be the next to break off to be a head coach of the program. He could take that Nick Lee role, because Lee's grown very quickly.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, you got Cale, then you have his brother and Casey Cunningham as the next level, and then Nick Lee's building his way up there very quickly.
Yep.
Yeah, because in the lighter weights, at least, we'd see Cody Sanderson and Nick Lee. With them, Cale would be you wouldn't even see him.
Cale followed K-Sack around. That was interesting to see. It'd be at times where it'd be only him and K-Sack. So I'm wondering if that's just because he might think that he's taking that next step. But yeah, just to bounce off your point, you'd see Lee and Cody Sanderson with the lighter weights. Even sometimes you'd see Casey Cunningham with some of the other middle to heavyweights, and then you'd see Cale with obviously 157 and up.
Yeah, and to go off of what you said, Evan, about that certain record, I think I might have found it. Dan Gable, the Iowa coach, has 15 national championships. So
Cale probably wants 20.
It's 3 away, right? He'd be 3 away from tying.
Cale is 12
now. Yeah, so he's 3 away from tying that. Be interesting to see what happens. Penn State continues on this run. It'd probably be in 3 or 4 years where that stands, and then what the coaching staff looks like from there.
See, to counter that point a little bit, if that's true, if he was to retire after that, wouldn't his sons be coming up just like then in
Right.
that time?
Yeah.
I think he'd want to coach his sons, and then maybe after them, I could see him retiring.
Yeah, but and almost to counter that and counter myself.
Wow, way to counter yourself there.
He loves what he's doing.
Yeah.
And he really shows that whenever he talks to the media, that he really enjoys seeing these guys grow, really enjoys watching them wrestle, helping them wrestle. He even still was wrestling them in the room. So
And
I think
apparently pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
if
I
you
mean,
listen
he's-
to like a lot of big names talk, like Ben Askren talking about how even he with Mitchell Messenbring can't beat him, but he goes, yeah, when you're wrestling a guy like Cale Sanderson who can beat you whenever he wants, like it seems like he's still obviously not competitive level, but up here.
really he's the best wrestler ever.
Yeah.
He went undefeated, 159-0, won 4 national titles. Like, it helps that he's still able to wrestle these guys, so they're still facing, quote unquote, the like best wrestler of all time. I know he's a lot older than and probably not as good as he was whenever he was in college, but he still has that talent.
He's also still beating these guys. I mean,
Right.
He's definitely sparring guys against guys like Levi Haynes and probably even Strachey and maybe even Barr. I don't know, but
Well, he's 84 and 97, so
yeah, that
makes sense.
That would make sense. But it's one of those things where like I doubt if he's not even beating some of these guys half the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
So-
makes sense.
Carter Strachey, national championship, 5-time national champion. Now to 197. The other national championship match we saw, Josh Barr wasn't able to get it done against the 6th-year senior Stephen Buchanan.
Evan, I'm going to let you start with this one.
Yeah, so Cale did say in the press conference afterwards that Barr, they really didn't know how he was going to look because his leg wasn't fully healed entering this tournament. On top of that, I think it was the second match he was in where he dove at his opponent's leg and it looked like he almost knocked himself out for a second. They had to pause for him. He was stuck there, but they ended up letting him keep going. And from that point on up until that final match, he looked pretty dominant. Now, he didn't dominate Jacob Cardenas, but Big Ten champion.
Right.
You're not going to call that, but up until that point, Josh Barr had that quick-looking Josh Barr in him that, we talk about how when he faced a lower opponent, it's kind of similar to Davis. Kind of, actually both of them if you look at it. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
where, lower opponents, he'll just go out there like a lightning bolt. But then the higher guys, he'll slow down a bit with. And that's kind of what got him in the Buchanan match. I do think if you have any wrestler, you could argue, I'm not going to say I don't want to say got screwed, but like, is there something a tier below that?
Unlucky,
Yeah, I'd say unlucky.
I guess
so-
you could say.
There are multiple occasions where Buchanan just straight up had his hands locked to the point where Daniel Cormier was, getting heated watching it. I'm not going to say any extra, but he lost 5-2. He probably could have gotten at least two blatant calls of, locked hands there that he didn't receive in that final match. But freshman year, injured at least once, kind of shaken up after another match. You can't complain with a finals loss.
Yeah, and I think for me at least in the Barr Buchanan match, that was the real issue. Is Buchanan was so much bigger than Barr. He was definitely the bigger wrestler, and I think in weight classes like this, that really matters, right?
Mhm.
And I will say, just looking for Barr for next season, this is another one that, as I said earlier, with
Levi Haynes.
yes, with Levi Haynes, thank you. That Barr could really run this weight class next year because Cardenas is graduating, Buchanan's no more eligibility, and even Michael Beard won't be back next year. So
Right.
it's him and AJ Ferrari who.
Our favorite guy.
But I think for Josh Barr, this is your freshman season, right? Redshirt freshman, and
Yeah.
to come in second place when this is your new weight class as well, because he
Right.
was an 84-pounder last year. There's nothing that could be said negatively about that. They
No.
should only build off of this.
Yeah. I wanted to say on AJ Ferrari's case, we talked a lot of crap about him this year, not really knowing who he was. Now that we know who he is, you're welcome.
I will say though,
He's entertaining.
I'll
give
that's
him
what I
that.
will say.
I will say
He's
he-
entertaining, And I think he didn't, obviously, earlier in the year really wrestle anyone. I do think he's a top 5 wrestler in this weight class.
Oh, yeah.
He's really good.
He did bump my Twitter views about 100K. I'm on the AJ Ferrari feed. I don't know how to feel about that.
Well,
but I guess it's the organic underwear.
Yeah, there are some.
Yeah, he had some interesting quotes.
There are interesting quotes. There are also ones where like he was actually providing like really good insight. Like, asked about Storace, there's history there. He still provided a unbiased answer, which was really cool to see.
Yeah, and even he was asked about Barr and Buchanan.
Yeah,
he gave a legitimate answer about both wrestlers and why. I forgot who he chose to win this one, but he really went deep into the his analysis of both, and I was almost caught a little not off guard just because I don't really know much about him, but his takes were actually a lot better than I thought they were going to be, and really unbiased, which I was a little surprised by.
The only issue though is a lot of his analysis changed, as first off because he lost to Buchanan, because what he did was prior to that match that he had with Buchanan, it was those 3 Barr Cardenas. He said that. Oh, yeah, me, Cardenas, and me, Cardenas, and Buchanan are the top of this class. Didn't even mention Josh Barr. And then he goes, but I can beat Buchanan because he's, and I quote, all go, go, go. And then Buchanan, goes and beats him. And then all of a sudden...
That was good.
That was a good one.
All of a sudden, now he's talking up Buchanan like he's something really good. And now Josh Barr is in that conversation. I think it is good motivation for Barr that his now probably number 2 in that class didn't respect him coming into this weekend, and now he forced his hand a bit.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, Ferrari said something along the lines of Josh Barr is gold, but he's a freshman, so that inexperience is going to benefit Buchanan. Buchanan, with a ton of experience, is going to end up winning, and he picked Buchanan, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he did pick Buchanan.
So, and at the end there, Barr... There was a point where he looked like he was like a little wobbly in a sense, so maybe that dive was still like he was still feeling the effects of that. But I'm interested to see what a fully healthy Josh Barr looks like next year after a year of growing into that weight.
Yeah, because I remember there was some discussion of maybe he dropped back to 184, but I think it was Matt Scouts basically said Barr, 1, is a true contender at 197, and 2, put up a lot more weight than he expected him to put on even this year.
Yeah.
So he can probably grow to like a true 197-pounder over this offseason.
Yeah. And now we're going to go into the heavyweight division where you really see a lot of different builds in this class. And Greg Kirkfleet, the number 3 seed, ended up falling to Wyatt Hendrickson in the semifinals and had to medically forfeit. We learned that he had an injury in practice leading up to that. So to even get that far, I think, was a good sign.
Yeah, because I believe we all saw Greg walking around the last 2 days of that tournament. He was just straight up limping.
Yeah.
Looked like it was an ankle problem. Not going to speculate. We heard some things, but it's not our business to bring that up, honestly.
Yep.
But the fact that he was able to walk through the semifinal, especially looking as good as he did with an injury that looked pretty severe, it's going to make a guy like Greg Kirkfleet limp.
Yep.
And then, only lose to a guy that I'm sure we're going to talk about this match momentarily.
Yeah, I have a great transition here.
Is now wrestling's biggest superstar.
Yeah, and you're talking about that match. That might be one of the best sporting events, just that match, I've ever been to in my life. Hendrickson versus Stevenson. Hendrickson with like 30 seconds left gets the takedown and then throws Stevenson down again and, does basically the unthinkable. And that was just crazy to be in that arena for. I mean, the crowd went nuts. And you can even see on the zoom in of Stevenson's face that he was shocked that he had just gotten taken down. And, I'm going to give some props to the guy sitting to the right of me here. Might look like the left if you're watching. But Evan's been talking highly of Wyatt Hendrickson, and he showed out in this national championships, ends up becoming the national champion. I am here to talk about Greg Kirkfleet, so let me dial it back a bit. But for Kirkfleet, it's something that you feel bad for him almost, that he couldn't end up wrestling to even try and get higher, and he ends with 6th, I believe.
Yeah.
And, just for him to go out like that, he did get the national championship last year, so. But yeah, you could tell when he was walking around on that last day when they were doing the All-American parade that something was definitely wrong. He was limping. It was pretty easy to see, but he tried to fight it out, I guess, to see if he could beat Hendrickson. Hendrickson kind of dominated that match, and wow, what a weekend for Wyatt Hendrickson. But for Kerkvliet, again, just unfortunate ending for him, but still, I got nothing else for that, honestly.
I just do want to add real quick to Hendrickson.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, all that talk about the match order being wrong kind of had to get put to bed after that.
Yep.
Yeah.
You couldn't have started better, because if you're just tuning in for the first time, you see a record-breaking win, and then the president walks in. It's like, what is going on here? And then you end up with probably the greatest one of the greatest moments in the history of the sport.
Yeah.
If not the greatest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably the biggest upset.
Yeah.
And
then out of the storylines with Hendrickson, his Air Force service, all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
He did a little salute at the end as well.
Yeah,
that
was pretty cool to see. And I know, because I think you were still down in media, we said after Hendrickson beat Kerkvliet that we think Hendrickson matches up better against Stevenson than Kerkvliet, and then he ended up winning.
And also, while down in media, I also had to miss that awesome moment. Only knew Hendrickson won when they put the name tag up, and half of media goes, "What?" Because he won it during Cale Sanderson's press conference, and then in the hallway you hear a bunch of screaming, like celebrating. I thought it was Stevenson because he walked out from the side and the meeting room was on, but then some of the guys in the room said, not the Penn State media, not the Oklahoma State media, but the other national was like, and to think that match wouldn't have even happened if Kerkvliet didn't have a bum leg. I feel like Oklahoma State media disagreed, and I also personally kind of did. I just have more respect for Hendrickson on the mat. Not that he would have beaten Greg, but that it would have been a very close match, probably a toss-up more than the dominant that it was.
Yeah, so Kerkvliet ended up finishing 6th, and Penn State yet again setting the points record with 177, setting history again. Probably the best team of all time.
Yep, that's right.
I'd
Say it. I wrote a column about that. Say it. Yep, best team of all time. Mm-hmm.
I mean, depth-wise, best team of all time.
Dude, 10 All-Americans, 2 national champions.
Plus, they scored enough bonus points to make up for 2, on the scoreboard, 2
They essentially had
champions.
4 national champions.
Yeah, that's exactly. Best team of all time. Continue.
It's like I'm still debating on that topic, though, because
no need to debate.
Those are bonus
official.
points based on like pins and tech falls, on matchups, not all based on placement.
Yeah.
Because if you take away
10 All-Americans. Let's move on.
All right, let's transition into
a potential future All-American?
Future All-American, potentially setting up the team to take over the greatest Penn State team of all time.
Oh, nice.
And a big announcement off of Flow Wrestling, and it's that Ono decides and announces that he is going to wrestle at Penn State.
Yeah.
Would you like to say his first name?
Masanosuke Ono.
If you guys remember, I think was it Friday morning or Thursday morning, where
I can't remember what day it was.
Pat Mineo noticed on Twitter that Ono was switched into a student role.
Ah, yes.
So we kind of saw it coming, and then once they announced that he was going to be on Flow Wrestling, it was like basically, okay, batten down the hatches. This is happening in the morning. I think my favorite tweet that I saw was that, I forget who tweeted it, but it was, "Oh no, Penn State's dynasty is going to be faltering." And it was Cale Sanderson. Oh no's right. All the discussion is, a lot of the whole rich get richer things doesn't usually fit for recruits, but in this case it does, because Masanosuke Ono is a senior level world champion.
Yeah.
He's beaten multi-time NCAA champs. He's beaten Olympic gold medalists. He's beaten other world champions. He's a bona fide superstar.
Yeah. Honestly, it's hard to really add anything, and I think we might have another pod where we might have to discuss the potential lineup for next year, because this just throws a whole different, this really changes it up a bit. But to get a wrestler, now, this isn't necessarily surprising, I want to say, because I think it was kind of known by many that if he was to go to college, it probably would be with Penn State, as he was training with the wrestling club, and for Cale Sanderson to just get him after, and winning another national championship, it's like, all right, this thing is continuing. And you've had a lot of talk about Penn State's weaker 2026 class, which we'll get into a little bit later. But for Ono to come in next year, that's a big get for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, that talk didn't age well, did it?
No, it did not. Not even a little bit.
Yeah, and to throw out a name of who he's beaten, Spencer Lee.
Yeah, that's a big
Now, it's all freestyle. Be interesting to see how he transitions to folk style. But he's in the best wrestling room in the country. He's going to face and train with multi-time NCAA champions and multi-time All-Americans. So this is probably the best spot for him to learn the folk style. And he basically guaranteed he's going to be an NCAA champion at some point.
I mean, how could you really doubt him?
Right.
He's a gold medalist. What makes it think he's not an NCAA champion? Also, one thing I wanted to add was, he said, I believe he said this, that, he chose Penn State wrestling because they're the best.
Yeah.
They also cut their sweatpants. He really liked that. But a lot of the talk is about where he fits into the lineup. At first, I kind of had him slotted into the 133 and then put Marcus Blaze at 141 because he's also getting talk of like a generational type recruit here.
Yeah.
But the good point was that his weight class internationally is 134.5. And there's a big difference between trying to get to that weight once every couple months versus getting a pound and a half lower every week while also actively getting older, so potentially growing. So I think he would end up taking that 141 slot. And the talk about him getting better at folk style, you said it, he's in the best room. If you're going to be rolling around with Kel Sanderson and the entire NWC. And there's been talk that while he was training here, he was beating guys in the lineup up at least a couple weight classes. So I don't think there's really going to be any much of a challenge for Ono. Maybe there's a few matchups where he gets stuck on the bottom and he's not able to work himself out per se. It's basically the discussion on Twitter. But he's a world champion, and he's got darn near a year to work on that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he's going to come back over in like August because his next tournament is the World Championships in June or July, and then after that he'd probably join Penn State. So a lot of time to work on that aspect of his game, and everything else he's tried to do he's been pretty dang successful at.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, especially with that almost late join, to see when he actually debuts. Like, is he going to start right away at the beginning of the season? He'll have a couple months, but will that be enough? He's a really good athlete, so you would think the questions aren't as serious because of his athleticism, and we'll transition right into the other commit that just announced yesterday. Jaden James, the number 4 recruit in the class of 2026, according to Flow Wrestling, flipped his commitment from Virginia Tech to Penn State. So what did you really, what stands out about James's commitment?
I think this kind of tells the story of what college wrestling is. In that up until this year, James was seen as like a good recruit. Then this year, he flips a switch. He's, 40,
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
And every match but one was a tech fall or a pin. And once he reaches that level, he flips over to a Penn State. I think it's true in college wrestling. There really is it's Penn State, Oklahoma State, Iowa, everybody else.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And this is just walking proof of it.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And, again, I really mentioned before that, people have been talking negatively about, how come Penn State can't get a top 5 recruit in 2026 class? Well, they did. They got, Jaden James, who's number 4 on Flow Wrestling. And also, just to even counter my own point, when you have the number 1 and 2 guy in 2025 class, it's probably going to be a little difficult to fit everyone in the lineup eventually. But to get a guy like James, one, this helps Penn State's overall recruiting class, as I believe he joins only Sam Herring right now as the only other recruit from commit from the 2026 class, and Herring, I believe, is 20.
Yeah.
But definitely helps, almost it's just, as Evan said, it's really Penn State, Iowa, Oklahoma State, and everyone else. And when you get to a point where you're in James's shoes and you see Penn State win another national champion and, multiple wrestlers be successful, how can you not join when you have the offer?
Right. And I believe his last just won the state championship at 150 pounds, but he projects to be a 174 pounder. Another pitch that could have been made. Levi Haynes will be gone at that point.
Mm-hmm.
There's an open spot.
Yeah.
Like, he could immediately take over at 174. I'm interested to see where Penn State moves up in the recruiting rankings for 2026. They're currently 17th, or they were 17th.
Yeah, I believe
with
that's
Sam
without
Herring.
him. Yeah.
They would presumably move up into the top 10. Jane James himself with Virginia Tech had Virginia Tech at number 6.
Oh, wow.
So that aspect, it'll be interesting to see where the new rankings have Penn State, but just absolutely dominated this season in one of the harder schedules that a high school wrestler will face, and just another massive commit for Cale Sanderson.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing interesting to me is a lot of the names that we're overlooking in this Penn State lineup now because of how many recruits they're bringing in. Down at 133, it almost feels like Brayden Davis has kind of lost his spot after coming 5th place in the nation. Everyone's like, oh, he'll just redshirt. Do you really want a redshirt when you won a Big Ten championship your freshman year and top 5 in the nation? And then even up at 174, we're saying next year put James at 174. Joe Steely's still waiting in that kind of upper middle class as a guy who was seen as the number 1 and is now blocked everywhere. And then the only spot for Penn State's lineup that I think we all agree isn't set in stone is heavyweight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's just because of the depth there. But I think Davis is going to be interesting because I think they're going to change his weight class. But that's for a different. I think we should do a different show for that because we have so many different opinions.
we can
for the
keep
lineup.
doing this podcast.
Come back next week, and we'll
Be like Gable Steveson and watch the mat return.
We'll debate the Penn
bad
State
for a
lineup
30-year-old.
for next year. Jordan James, just a massive commit for Cale Sanderson.
Yeah. Jaden James.
Jaden James.
Yeah,
He's
way
no
to go.
David Davis.
Yeah, no, but again, there's not many, I'll say top 10 recruits left in the 2026 class. So for Penn State to secure at least one of them, definitely a positive trend for the future.
Yeah. That'll do it for this week's edition of The Mat Return. I'm Andrew Deal.
I'm AJ Piazza.
And I'm Evan Smith.
And make sure you subscribe to the wrestling newsletter and stay tuned for more episodes in the offseason talking about next year's wrestling team. Speeding off.